Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Now let's turn to the latest seismic development in the Israeli-Hamas conflict. The Israeli military has been dropping leaflets on Gaza, telling people in the north of the territory to leave by the end of the day for their own safety. But the UN says it'll be impossible for more than 1 million Palestinians to follow that evacuation order without devastating humanitarian consequences. They say the situation is horrific and people have no place to go. Hamas called the Israeli evacuation order psychological warfare and fake propaganda. And at Friday prayers, mosques urged people to ignore the order and not to leave. However, many frightened families are already on the move, some walking miles on foot, others in vehicles piled up with their possessions, all of them heading south, all of them refugees in their own land. So will it be possible for more than 1 million people to move south within 24 hours? And what does all this mean for the future of the territory? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from Abuja by the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Michael Freeman. Mr. Freeman, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I know this has been a busy period for you, so we appreciate your taking the time to talk to us. What is the operational idea behind telling more than 1 million people in northern Gaza to leave by the end of the day?
Well, good evening, Charles, and thank you very much for having me. As you know, on Saturday, thousands of Hamas terrorists came across the border and they broke through and entered into Israeli towns and villages and communities. And there they carried out barbaric acts of murder and terror and massacred 1,300 of Israeli citizens. Men, women, and children in the most horrific way. And I don't want to go into details because it will horrify your viewers. The stories of what they did and how they did it and the way they treated babies and young children. And so by Hamas declaring this war, we will now take whatever action we need to take in order to make sure that Hamas can never do this again. And what we're doing is we're warning the civilian population. The civilians of Gaza are not our enemies. The Palestinians are not our enemies. This is about Hamas. And so we are warning the civilian population to move out of the area that they are in temporarily. This is a temporary move so that we can target the Hamas terrorists.
Well, I mean, you do know, Ambassador, that Hamas are telling Gazans to stay put and not to move. So they're clearly in a difficult situation here. I mean, you've got people cowering in their homes in the face of relentless Israeli bombardments. They have no electricity. Their mobile phones have stopped working. I mean, do they even get the messages and the conflicting orders from Israel and from Hamas? And if they do emerge onto the street, is it Hamas or is it Israel who will exact punishment?
Well, we will not punish anybody. We want people to move. We are dropping thousands of leaflets. We are giving messages over the radio, and we are getting the message out there. Of course, Hamas are telling them not to move. Hamas wants civilian deaths. That's what makes the news. That's what makes the story. So Hamas, they don't care about Palestinians. They don't care about Israelis. They don't care about anybody except for themselves. Hamas, by the way, the Hamas terrorists have still got electricity. They've got their own generators. They've got their own supply systems. They have got their own diesel, but they prefer to use the diesel to fire rockets rather than to help their population. So when the Hamas-run mosques are calling people to stay, it's because Hamas wants Palestinians to die. And you and I can't understand that. We don't look at this and understand this in the way that Hamas do. You and I, we work like any rational country. We work in, we live in Israel, we live in Nigeria. We see how America and Britain and Germany and France and any other country in the world operates. And there we do everything we can to protect our civilians. Hamas do everything they can to endanger civilians. That is what they do. They want more dead Palestinians so that the headlines around the world can talk about dead Palestinians, and that they think that that will in some way stop us from weeding them out and destroying them. But we know that if we want a long-term better future, and we want any hope of peace in the future, then Hamas, who are ISIS, you should understand, they are the same as ISIS. They used ISIS tactics over the weekend. They murdered babies. They burnt babies alive. They mass raped, they attacked, they killed, they beheaded children. It was horrific what they did over the weekend. And so it's the duty of any moral person, any moral country, to target them, to limit what they can do, and to make sure they can never do this again.
Well, I mean, if we've got time, I'd like to come back to the issue of peace in the region. But does the continued pounding of Gaza by the Israeli military, the siege on Gaza, and now this evacuation order for more than 1 million residents of northern Gaza, I mean, does all that conform with international law and the laws of war?
Absolutely. Firstly, we are sticking by international law. There is no action that we take that's not double-checked with lawyers, internationally known lawyers. We check, we double-check to make sure that we're in line with international law. But, we have to remember that we are dealing with a evil terror organization similar to ISIS in their tactics and the way they did. And we need to use all of our power in order to stop them, in order to stop them carrying on. And we will do everything we can to limit civilian population. There's never been a war before where civilians haven't been killed. The difference is we will do what we can to avoid civilian casualties, and Hamas will do what they can to increase civilian casualties. So it's not going to be easy. We're facing a ruthless, vicious enemy that is willing to kill its own people. Hamas this evening, they took over 100 Israeli civilians as hostages. This evening, they released pictures. Hamas released pictures of babies, of toddlers, of little children that they have kidnapped and they are using as human shields. This is the face of Hamas. That yesterday they were saying they don't target civilians. Today, they released pictures of the fact they've kidnapped babies and toddlers. So it's quite clear who we're dealing with and what we're dealing. This is an evil regime.
I mean, I think that clearly nobody in their right mind would agree with anybody taking hostages. And I think that the world roundly condemns that, what Hamas has done there. But I mean, you talked about the fact that that Israel is doing this in accordance with international law. The UN, of course, has come out saying that what you're doing is collective punishment by imposing a siege on Gaza, and that is against international law. And what do you make of the UN's condemnation of the evacuation order? I mean, it's released a statement saying it's impossible for such a movement to take place without devastating humanitarian consequences. I mean, they clearly don't share your view and that of the Israeli army that this is feasible. They see it as a logistical impossibility.
We have asked 1 million people to move because we are going to take military action. And the opposite of them staying will cause many, many, many civilian deaths. The people who are responsible for this are Hamas. If tomorrow the Hamas terrorists surrender, they return the hostages, this would all be over. This is not about us trying to tackle the Palestinians or anything like that. This is about Hamas. Hamas are cynically using their population. They are cynically using the world's media in order to try and terrorize the world. And we can't let that happen. We have to take actions that are going to be very, very difficult. I see on the screen at the moment, you're showing this picture of this poor Israeli woman who you can see the evidence of what's been done to her. I don't think your viewers need much imagination to understand what that blood-soaked area is and what's happened there. But they've been brutally tortured and brutally murdered. And I understand the difficulties. I really do understand the difficulties. But there is no other alternative. If we want to tackle Hamas and we want to take them out, we need to do what's necessary. And we've asked the civilians to leave so that we can reduce civilian casualties. It's Hamas that want them to stay. If it takes a little bit of more time for them to leave, then there'll be more time. But we need to do what needs to be done in order to tackle Hamas. And you know, everybody who says to us, well, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, they're not giving us an answer. Because if we don't do this in a month's time or 6 months' time or a year's time or however long, Hamas will come back in and they will massacre another 1,000 or 2,000 people. So at this point, we have to tackle Hamas, and nobody is saying to us, the only answer that people have said is just don't do anything, let them kill you, and call for, and then we'll hope that it'll be okay afterwards. Well, that's preposterous. They've declared war. They've massacred my people. You know, Israel's a very small country. There is not anybody who doesn't know someone or know someone who knows someone who was murdered or who was kidnapped. That's what's happened in this country. You know, on Saturday, more Jews were killed in a single day than any other time since the Holocaust. And that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with ISIS and Nazis, and we need to deal with it. And we're going to do, and it's going to be difficult and it's going to be tough, but there is no other alternative.
We roundly condemn that attack on Israelis. Nobody deserves to go through what Israel has gone through. And but on the other hand, no civilian deserves to go through what the Palestinians are going through. I mean, you say that you don't want to cause unnecessary suffering to the people of Gaza, and yet even before the widely anticipated ground invasion by Israeli forces, you've got the head of the main UN relief agency responsible for the Gaza Strip saying the scale and speed of the unfolding humanitarian crisis is bone-chilling, that Gaza is fast becoming a hellhole and is on the brink of collapse. I mean, for all your protestations, Ambassador, it doesn't sound like you know, Israel is particularly concerned about the welfare of the civilians of Gaza, or that, you know, that is in any way going to stay your hand.
My heart breaks for the Palestinians in Gaza. Genuinely, it does. I am really. I have huge sympathy for the population. They've been terrorized and they've been run by this terror organization of Hamas since 2007. I'm sure that the Palestinian population, when we take Hamas out, will be the ones to benefit immediately as well. And you're right, it's going to be difficult, and the Palestinian population in Gaza is going to suffer. But we have no choice. 1,300 of our people were massacred, and over 100 people were taken hostage. And we cannot allow that to happen again. When the world fought ISIS, when the world did what they needed to do, unfortunately, civilians were harmed. And it's tragic and it's terrible. But we need to think also of the long term. If we don't take the action we take now, then in a month's time or 3 months' time or 6 months' time, Hamas do the same thing again. But it's not only Hamas that do that. The rest of the world is watching. Iran is watching. Hezbollah is watching. Other terror organizations are watching. And if they see that the world does not want and does not have the stomach for a fight against radical extreme terrorism, their heads will pop up all over the world, including in Africa, in order for them to carry out the same idea. They need to understand that the world will not accept this sort of terrorism and will do what is necessary in order to take it out. And I hope that we can do this quickly. I hope that we can do this efficiently. And I hope that as few civilians as possible will suffer.
Meanwhile, of course, Ambassador, while understandably the focus is now on what happens in Gaza, I mean, difficult questions must remain about how all of this was allowed to happen in the first place. I mean, how was Hamas able to plan an attack on such a huge scale, something that must have taken months? I mean, without Israel's intelligence services realizing what was going on. And on that fateful Saturday, I mean, did no one notice that thousands of heavily armed Hamas fighters were about to break through the border?
Charles, it's a great question. And it's a question that Israelis are asking every single day. And the Israelis are a very self-critical people, and all of these questions will be asked, and I'm sure there will be various inquiries, and they will all take place the day after this war will finishes. Because you're right, there is no question there was a significant failure on behalf of the Israeli systems, and we will investigate that. But that will be for the day after the war. At this point, we are all united. I've never seen Israel so united. We've had a year where we've been divided politically and we've been arguing over all sorts of internal things. But now we are totally, totally united. I've never seen the country as united and as committed. And we will fight this war that Hamas have launched against us. We will win this war. Then we will ask the very, very tough question that you raised, Charles, and we need to deal with that.
Ambassador, I want to thank you very much indeed for the time that you've taken to talk to us. That's the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Michael Freeman, talking to me there on the line from Abuja.